Okay, well, here's Moises' question. It says, should I prioritize reaching 25% investing over a first home down payment? I'm 28 and married and currently on step 5 of the FOO. And I think this echoes a pretty broad question that we're getting a lot. So could you speak to this?
You said 28, married or unmarried?
Married 28. And currently on step 5 of the financial order of operations.
Okay. I'm going to reframe your question, Moises. We get this all the time. Should I save 25% or should I save for my first time home purchase? Should I save for a down payment? We believe deep in the fiber of our being that money is nothing more than a tool that allows us to achieve the goals we want to achieve. And so one of the questions that I ask Moises, you and your spouse, is, hey, what are your goals? What are the things in life that are the most important to you, and how would you order them and how would you prioritize them? And once you have that list, then I'll say, okay, now let's figure out what strategies we can implement to hit those. Most folks, I would argue, have a goal of financial independence. But I would argue most folks, especially those who are thinking about, they're married, they're thinking about having a family, thinking about establishing roots, one of the goals they might have may be to buy a home. It may be to own a primary residence. And usually the goal of owning a primary residence comes before, timeline-wise, financial independence. And so I would say, as you're thinking through this, how do you prioritize where you are allocating your dollars to be able to achieve those goals? Now, we talk about it all the time. We think that you can approach it as a best of both worlds. We don't think it's something where it has to be all of one, all of the other, but your timeline will dictate that. The only point that I'm making for you, Moses, is I don't think there's like a definite finite right answer. You have to save 25% before you can buy a house, or you have to buy a house before you can save 25%. I think it depends on ultimately what you're trying to achieve, both in the short term and the long term.
Well, I think about as financial order of operations was being designed, I tried to think about every rule, and I said, what rule and how I follow this is not going to make me a hypocrite for my own life. And because I know that a lot of these systems, when you hear people talk about it, I always think about, do they have enough grace in them to reflect the reality of that life throws crazy stuff at us? And you think you have things whipped, and then something bad happens, or your job change, or just life changes. Like even Bo, I think about you, I felt like I bullied you into your first house because you found out, your wife and you found out you were pregnant.
Yep.
And
first house up here in Tennessee.
First house in Tennessee, and we were like, get a house. Yeah. So it was kind of, the timing wasn't what you had originally thought. It kind of just, we made it happen. But I think about that with other people in the fact that 25% is the ideal savings rate. However, I look back on my own life, and when I started my first company in 2002, I didn't make it to 25% because life was happening in a way that I just didn't reach that goal. So here's what I want to help Moises frame his mindset. There are going to come times in your life where you might have to deviate from the ideal of saving 25%, but that doesn't mean that you get out of the obligations of this. It just means you probably need to get to the point that you have your emergency reserves 3 to 6 months set up, and then say, okay, what's next? Am I doing my Roth? Am I saving for my house down payment? Well, realize we gave you the grace of, we're only saying on your very first house, you only have to put down 3 to 5%. So if you can know what that goal is of 3 to 5% down payment, and then you can look at your income, you can look at what the annual funding limits are for a Roth IRA, which is $7,000 currently, you can say, man, because of the grace of that rule where I only need to put down 3 to 5% on my first house, yes, I've got my emergency reserves fully funded, but maybe I should still be dollar cost averaging into my Roth, use the additional savings once I've gotten to 15 to 20% to start also building that cash reserves up to be the down payment to get to 3 to 5%. But I want you to have this fear, because when I've broken the rules or I've deviated slightly, I've had this chasing fear. You know when you go to sleep and you have the nightmare where it feels like you're either falling or somebody's chasing you, or there's a clock, the buzzer's going to go off at an undisclosed time and it's going to catch you. That's the fear you need to be doing anytime you are not making progress because you need to take a moment in time to get that 3 to 5% for a down payment, or maybe you're taking a risk of starting an entrepreneurial endeavor. You need to say, how fast can I get this thing back on course? Because what I don't want you to do, you're 28 years of age, and wouldn't you know it, it's the day I took it's actually about the wealth multiplier for a 28-year-old. Every dollar is worth close to $30. It's 29.7. You need to be thinking about every day that you're not doing what you're supposed to because you're saving up for the house down payment, which is a very noble cause, by the way, especially with a growing family and everything else, is how can I get this thing back on track ASAP? And if you will have that healthy respect and say, like I said, still be doing 15 to 20% for the future, I'll give you the grace to say that 20 to 25 on steps 5 and 6, get the house. I mean, I think that's why we give you the 3 to 5% guidance versus 20% like a lot of other financial people out there, is because we know that life is complicated, life is messy, and we want to give you the guidance, the rules, but also keep the pressure on you so you don't wake up and you're 35 years old and go, what did I do for the last 7 years? You should have been putting pressure on yourself to get this thing back on course as fast as possible.
Love it.